Hello, and welcome to the Performer's Guide, Pricing Yourself Like a Pro. My name is Kristen Railing, and today we will be discussing travel, perks, and exposure. So, travel expenses, perks, and exposure should be added on top of a performer's day rate and should be considered separate of the day rate when we're doing our proposals with the client. And during negotiation, the client will often utilize travel, perks, and exposure to mitigate and compensation. And so what we want to do in this module is break down the reasons why travels, perks, and exposure should be added on top of our day rate and not to be included with it, because it doesn't actually pay our financial bills. It doesn't pay our financial security, our financial vitality, or our financial independence numbers. These rates go towards making this event happen. So travel expenses, if you're traveling to an event, this is usually because the client has hired you to go to this event and perform, and therefore there is a financial cost and an emotional cost and a time cost that is spent for you to get to the gig. And as a performer, those costs don't go towards your bills, they go towards the costs of getting to the gig for the client. And so we really want to add those on top and add those separately from our day rate. Oftentimes the client will try to leverage the grace of getting us to the client, getting us to the gig as leverage to lower our rates. But oftentimes we wouldn't even be going to these cities if we weren't hired for these clients. And even if we were, the costs of getting there often don't outweigh the benefit of us paying for them outright. But oftentimes we will need to spend them up front and then get reimbursed from the client, or the other way around is the client will pay for them up front. And so you really want to go in with the negotiation tactic of understanding that some expenses you need to pay up front and you'll get reimbursed for, and some the client will pay for up front, and which ones are you entitled to and which ones would you actually need to pay for yourself. So some examples of common travel expenses incurred during a gig are parking, gas, lodging, food, transportation costs, and flights. So you're going to want to make sure you look up local travel expenses in both your area and the client's area to make sure that you're choosing reasonable rates that are average for your area. The rates that I pulled are coming from California's averages. And what I did was I just typed in the state average gas reimbursement rates, average hotel rates, average per diem stipend rates, average daily travel rates, and average flight costs from city to city. And I would just type in where I am and where the client is. And so you can pretty quickly just type these into Google and get quick numbers that you can throw into your proposal and just sort of set the standard right away that there's additional costs if you need to travel out of state. So the most common cost incurred would be the parking validation. You're doing a local gig, you get to the gig night of, and oh, there's a parking meter, or oh, there's a parking validation ticket. and you didn't think about that when you get there. And so oftentimes you can go to the client and say, ask them for validation, but sometimes they won't validate it because they themselves don't actually work for the venue, and they would have had to do some other additional work to get the validation. And so we really want to make sure that we figure out if the area that we're performing for is going to have parking validation, and will that be covered? How much will it be? Do you need to pay it up front, or is it going to be covered? Sometimes they'll like stamp your validation. Sometimes they'll switch out the ticket for a different one. So we just really want to make sure what the protocol is, that because that can get kind of confusing for people when you're trying to leave at the end of the gig, and then all of a sudden you're hit with a $30 bill on the way out. So the second one that you would incur would be mileage reimbursement. So this would be for a gig that's a little bit further away, maybe not quite right in your city, but just outside the next city. Pretty much anything over 10 to 20 miles, you would start to add on mileage reimbursement. And in California, the average mile reimbursement is 58 cents a mile. And so you would just calculate how far away the gig is round trip and multiply that by 58 cents. And so you can kind of do the math, like if it's 200 miles, it's going to be around $100, like around 50%. But if you just do it at the 50%, then you're going to be losing even just the little $16 there. So we really want to make sure that we check these numbers, are even from 2018. It might have gone up a little bit by the time you're watching this video. And it might be different in your state as well. But all these costs add up. So the next one that you might incur would be a hotel accommodation. So this would be for a gig that's either so far that you would need to stay a night in a hotel to continue your journey, or you're at a gig for so long that you're there for 3 or 4 nights and you would get hotel accommodation. And so in California, roughly 186, I would probably just round up and charge them $200 a night for hotel accommodations if I needed to stay and pay for it out of pocket. You're also going to want to remember that hotels have deposits, and when you get there, even if the room's covered, you're often going to have to fit the deposit because it's kind of the standard, rock star comes in and destroys the hotel room. So often the client's not going to pay the deposit. The deposit will rest on you unless you talk to them beforehand. And sometimes you can finagle them at the front desk or call the hotel manager over and just be like, ooh, about that. And sometimes they'll waive it, sometimes they won't. So you really just want to make sure you have $100 to $200 on hand to be able to pay the deposit, just in case. It's embarrassing when you're like, oh, you didn't have a credit card, I didn't realize. So the next one we would have is per diem food stipend. So now we're at a gig, it's kind of far away. We're in a hotel room for multiple nights. And that often means that we're going to have a gig that we're going to be there for a long shift, either multiple sets, maybe there's rehearsal days, maybe there's just really long nights, and you're there where you would need either breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and potentially all three. And so for these kind of gigs, I always request food directly in the green room, or I'll request meal tickets, or if they're like, ooh, sorry, we don't have any way to provide any of those things, then I'll just add on a per diem stipend per person. And this kind of gives about $20 per meal and the ability to tip. And, I would a little bit more if it's higher end client. So sometimes when you're doing a gig, you're all carpooling together. Maybe you rented a van, or we're carpooling or something, and it doesn't make sense to pay everybody a gas stipend and a per diem food and a hotel. Sometimes there's like a tipping point with it. And so sometimes you can just go with a daily travel rate. And so let's say I have a gig Friday, Saturday, Sunday in a different city, then I would just add on Thursday and Monday travel days for me to get to and from my destination if I'm traveling with other people. And that average for California. So if you're getting a client that is in a different city, you're just going to immediately want to go check flight averages from this city to this city, from those dates to this date. And then you can start to just set the tone for, okay, flights are going to cost this much. My day rate is this much. I'll need these type of hotel accommodations. And all these things should be added on top of your rate and paid for by the client ahead of time, unless negotiated that you need to pay for them and then be reimbursed. But I usually just take gigs where they pay for it up front, because sometimes you could wait up to 2 months for flight reimbursements. Next, we're going to talk about perks. I think that perks are one of the #1 negotiation tactic. Clients like to come in and utilize perks as a trade for pay. And they say, look at all these amazing benefits that I'm providing you for this gig. That can justify a low rate, right? And wrong. What we want to do is we want to just even look at the word perk. Perk means special advantage, benefit, in addition to, is something on top of. It's already literally written within the term. It's a perk that comes on top of your performance rate, on top of your travel expenses and taxes. And we really want to learn to turn the table so we can leverage perks in our advantage and not allow the client to use it to chip away at our rate. Some common tangible perks that we can utilize for our benefit are accommodations, guest passes, food, drinks, meal vouchers, excursions and tours, memberships, and swag bags. Guest passes, the old classic +1. So I always love to start here. It really makes the event more pleasurable if you're able to bring somebody with you, especially if the event is something that is marketable and valuable in people's eyes. That guest passes, if you can get 1, 2, 10 guest passes, you try to leverage as many +1s as you can, as long as the event is actually something that people want to go to, because I think a lot of times events will try to lop on guest passes as a benefit when it's an event you couldn't even give away a pass to, And then oftentimes, if the rate is low, you can ask them if that you can get additional guest passes to sell or to give away. Sometimes that can, make up for some compensation. If the event is a multiple day event, or if it's a hotel that has events, or a nightclub that often has multiple events, amusement parks, theater, any type of show, then these type of events often have future passes available, to where you can ask them for not only just 1 +1 during the event that you're performing, but you could ask them for events throughout the year. And so I like to often leverage asking for multiple future passes put in my name that I can utilize whenever I want. Meal vouchers. So meal vouchers are great because you can leverage them during the event. You can get meal tickets and eat in the green room. You can have food brought to the green room, meal tickets. There's lots of different ways that you can utilize meals. And then you can also utilize getting meals in the future. And so if you're working for restaurants or nightclubs with restaurants attached to them, many of these, often if you look around on the website, you can usually see if there's a restaurant attached to the venue, and then you could just ask if you can get a few tickets for future use. Excursion and tours are usually available for gigs like cruise ships, harbor gigs, downtown, the city. Oftentimes will host tourists who come in and they want to do excursions or tours, like a bus tour or scuba diving tour. Or so I myself, working for hotels and cruise ships, I've gotten to walk on glaciers. I've gotten to kayak through jellyfish. I've been able to skydive. I've been able to scuba dive into barrier reefs. And I've been able to do all of these for free just by leveraging a client who has these available and just asking if I can jump on board. Because most of the time those excursions aren't fully booked and they're really excited to have a circus performer join the tour and make it a little bit more fun for everyone. Membership programs are great if you have a gig at a gym or any kind of exclusive library or something that requires an annual membership. And so if you look on the website and see that they do have something like that, they'll usually be happy to throw in a year-long gym membership because it doesn't cost them anything more just to have one more person come in, and then you'll usually upsell at some point during the membership in their mind. So they're usually pretty happy to give away membership programs. Swag bags, I don't personally love everything in a swag bag, but there's the energy of a swag bag and just being able to present them to your performers when they come in, and it's got their meal vouchers, their drink tickets, it's got some little swag bag stuff in there, and it really just sets the tone for your performers, makes them feel good. And a lot of times they just have this stuff sitting around and you can go, oh, you guys have some of your branded swag? I'd love to make a little bag for my performers. Dun, 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 the dreaded exposure. Woo! I feel like I see this meme flying around all the time. Don't die of exposure. We're not on the Oregon Trail. Don't even think about trading our time for exposure. Yes and no. I think there's a way to leverage exposure. And really, again, we can be learning to add exposure on top of our rate, utilizing it in our benefit and not dying of exposure. And really the only way we know when it's time to trade our rates for perks and exposure and all of these concepts is really just when it feels right energetically, and if you're able to pay your bills. This concept of dying of exposure is, when we're trading 100% of our rate for 100% of exposure and we're not able to pay our bills. But if you utilize exposure correctly, we can actually really gain exposure, gain marketing materials, and really leverage them to take our career to the next level, as long as we know how to take the reins and actually ask for the correct type of exposure. And so the first thing we really want to just remind the client is that exposure is not a financial compensation. It's a type of advertising. And so they're offering us a type of advertising that we're both benefiting from. And it's not a gift to us. Our presence on their marketing materials, also good exposure for them, just as it is for us. So these are the types of exposures that we want to really try to poke the client and see how much we can actually utilize from the client. Because I think oftentimes they really just try to utilize the bottom one of the event recap video. You're going to get on a video, or we'll have the event photographer walking around, and it'll be great exposure for you to get these amazing photos, maybe, that you might see potentially one day, but probably don't ever. And so what we really want to start focusing on is less post exposure and more pre-event coverage, because you can really build up a media stir in a pre-event coverage, even if the event itself is a flop, even if they don't take care of the exposure correctly, you don't see any of the videos, you don't see any of the photos that they promised, you can still leverage these things beforehand by sending them the correct media and photos you would like to have them promote on their website, on their social medias, making sure that you send them your logo so that they can add it to their flyer. A lot of times there's also pre-event news coverage, news paper, news video, actual news coverage. And you can ask them, hey, does this event have any news segments coming up that they would like a juggler or a hula hooper or a circus performer to help promote this event? And the best client that I got was, I did news segments 11 times, and they were all paid in 1 week. And I did the gig paid, my full rate, plus they flew me out, plus I stayed on a cruise ship. And so you're able to really leverage these things and go, is there more opportunities for me to get exposure really? And then if they say no, then I recommend creating your own opportunities for pre-event exposure. You know, taking images off their website, splicing them together, and creating a little media promo package. Creating your own relationships with news segment, with different news segments around. So you can just call them and go, hey, I've got this event that I'm performing at, and you tell them about it. And they're really following you around, less the event. And so you can get both personal media coverage that you're performing at this event and media coverage for the event featuring you. You can get into newspapers, and all of these things can be more beneficial than the gig itself, than the rate, than their crappy promo video that they put together that only has that 3 seconds of you getting, it's not even the best part of your act, you know, you're like in transition or something. And so instead you can ask them, can one of my plus ones be my own photographer and videographer? And then you can also sell them the images that you took during the gig, and go, okay, so I can either leverage the event to get the exposure I need, or I can leverage the event to create the exposure that I want in the way that I want. And so that's how I like to utilize exposure. I don't like to let the client utilize it as this bargaining chip for dwindling away my current rate. I'm adding value to the event, value that's going to be remembered digitally forever and in the minds of the clients. And so that's a value-based price that's added on top. And most of the time, clients are really excited to work with you on getting you included in their news coverage. And you can really build a lot of fun relationships that way, actually. So I really hope this helps clarify things for you on travel expenses, perks, and exposure, how we can utilize them to leverage more benefit from a gig and not allowing the client to use it as a bargaining chip to chip away at our rate. And once again, my name is Kristen Railing. This is the Performer's Guide, Pricing Yourself Like a Pro. Thank you for watching.